I never thought my family's game show dream would turn into a live TV scandal. But when I handed Steve Harvey a crumpled note, the cameras cut, and the truth shattered everything. The glare of the studio lights felt like an interrogation lamp. It baked the cheap polyester of my family's matching yellow shirt to my skin, and the manufactured applause from the audience felt a million miles away. All I could hear was the frantic thumping in my own chest, and the low, smug chuckle coming from the podium opposite ours. Chad Miller, captain of the Miller family. He stood there, all perfect teeth and a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, oozing the kind of confidence that only comes from a life where nothing has ever truly gone wrong. For the past 45 minutes he'd made it his personal mission to make this, my mom's dying wish, into my own personal hell. We were tied. It was the final round before Fast Money, and the survey was a make-or-break moment. Name something a man might be holding when his wife tells him she's pregnant. Steve Harvey, a legend in a shimmering teal suit, read the question with his signature charm, but I barely heard him. I was locked in on Chad. He'd hit the buzzer a microsecond before my sister, Lisa. His grin widened. "The remote control," he boomed, winking at the camera. The board dinged. Number 1 answer. The Miller family erupted in high-fives and whoops. Chad shot a look directly at me, a dismissive little smirk that said, "Game over, pal." He wasn't just playing to win. He was playing to humiliate. Earlier, when my little brother Kevin, nervous and stammering, had answered a puppy for name a common pet, Chad had let out an exaggerated theatrical sigh and muttered just loud enough for the mics to pick it up. Oh, bless his heart. The audience tittered, and Kevin's face had crumpled. I felt a hot, protective rage flare in my gut. This wasn't just a game show anymore. This was personal. This whole thing was for Mom. She'd watched Family Feud every single day through her chemo treatments. It was the only time I'd see her smile in those last few months. She'd call out answers from her hospice bed, her voice weak but her spirit fiery. "It's on the board, Stevie," she'd rasp, pointing a frail finger at the TV. Her dream was for us, her kids, to be on that stage, under those lights, laughing with Steve Harvey. After she passed, getting on the show became my obsession. I filled out the application with her pen. I coached my siblings for weeks, running drills with old survey questions until we were dreaming of them. We weren't here for the $20,000, not really. We were here to honor her memory, to have this one shining moment she never got. And Chad Miller was methodically, gleefully tarnishing it. His family cleaned up the board. Car keys. Ding. A beer. Ding. His phone. Ding. They only needed 10 more points to win the game and go to Fast Money. My family stood frozen, our fake smiles plastered on, the yellow of our shirts feeling more like a sign of cowardice than cheer. I could feel the folded piece of paper in my pocket. It felt like a small square block of ice against my thigh. My last resort. The nuclear option. I'd written it the night before, fueled by coffee and desperation, my hand shaking so badly I could barely form the letters. I told myself I'd never use it. It was too risky, too insane. It was breaking a rule so fundamental, so unspoken, that it wasn't even in the mountain of paperwork we signed. "All right, Miller family, you got 1 strike," Steve said, turning to Chad's father, a man with the same smug look, but more wrinkles. "Name something a man might be holding when his wife tells him she's pregnant." The old man puffed out his chest. "His head, Steve, in his hands." The audience roared with laughter. Steve chuckled along, playing it up. "His head, let's see it. Is his head up there?" The iconic soul-crushing buzz of a wrong answer echoed through the studio. Strike 2. The Millers' confident smiles faltered for the first time. Hope, fragile and dangerous, fluttered in my chest. They had one more chance. If they got a 3rd strike, the question came to us. We'd have 1 shot to steal the points and win the game. Steve moved to Chad's sister. Her face was pale. She wrung her hands. The pressure was immense. She stammered, a cigar? Like a celebratory cigar?" The silence was deafening. Even Chad looked nervous. Steve milked the moment, his eyes wide. "A celebratory cigar. Is it up there?" Buzz. Strike 3. The studio erupted. My family grabbed each other, screaming with relief. We had a chance. It all came down to this. Steve strode over to our podium, the crowd's energy a physical force. "All right, family," he said, his voice a low, dramatic rumble. "The Millers couldn't clear the board. You get 1 answer. If it's up there, you win the game and you're going to Fast Money. Talk amongst yourselves. We huddled together, my siblings' hopeful faces turned to me. What do we think? What's left? Lisa whispered urgently. But my mind was a blank slate. The pressure, Chad's sneering face, my mom's memory. It was all a swirling vortex of noise. I couldn't think. I glanced at the board. There were still 3 answers hidden. Chad was staring at me, his arms crossed, mouthing the words, "You got nothing." He was right. My brain had short-circuited. My heart sank. We were going to lose. We were going to fail Mom. And that's when my fingers closed around the note in my pocket. It wasn't about the game anymore. It wasn't even just about Chad. It was about the truth. It was the only move I had left. "Steve," I said, my voice coming out louder and clearer than I expected. The huddle broke. My family, the audience, even Steve looked at me surprised. I took a step away from my podium, which you're absolutely not supposed to do. A producer in the wings started waving his hands frantically, his face a mask of panic. "Whoa, hold on, son," Steve said, holding up a hand, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "You gotta give me the answer with your family." I ignored him. I ignored the gasps from the crowd and the frantic whispers from my sister. I walked the 10 feet that separated our families, that separated me from him, and I stood directly in front of Steve Harvey. I pulled the folded, crumpled note from my pocket. His folksy, charming game show host persona evaporated, replaced by genuine bewilderment. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, no longer for the cameras. "You need to read this," I said, my hand trembling as I held it out to him. "Please, before we give our answer." He stared at the note, then at my face, searching for an explanation. The entire studio was dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the electronics. He took the note from my hand. His eyes scanned the first few lines. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. His eyebrows shot up. The faint smile on his face vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed look of pure disbelief. He looked up from the paper, but not at me. He looked past me, into the darkness where the producers and network executives were watching. His face was pale. He took a deep breath, looked at the head floor manager, and uttered 5 words that shattered the illusion of television forever. "Cut the cameras. Cut the cameras now." The world didn't so much stop as it did shatter. The bright, cheerful game show set was plunged into a harsh, flat, work-light reality as the main camera lights went dark. The audience's confused murmur rose into a wave of sound. A man in a headset, the floor manager, was suddenly in my face, his expression a mixture of fury and panic. "What do you think you're doing? Who are you? You can't do this," he hissed, trying to physically herd me back to my podium. My sister Lisa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Oh my God, what did you do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're going to sue us. We're going to have to pay for the whole production." But I wasn't looking at the floor manager or my terrified sister. My eyes were locked on Steve Harvey. He stood frozen for a second, the crumpled note still in his hand, looking like he'd been struck by lightning. He held up a hand, and the frantic floor manager fell silent. Steve's gaze, which a moment ago was filled with a TV host's practiced warmth, was now hard as steel. He gestured for me to follow him, walking a few paces away from the podiums, into a small pocket of relative privacy near the edge of the stage. The Miller family was shouting now, Chad leading the charge. "What is this? He's cheating. This is a stunt. Get him out of here. We won, fair and square." His voice was a self-righteous bellow, but it sounded distant, muffled. Steve shielded the note with his body, leaning in close to me. The smell of his expensive cologne was overwhelming. "Is this for real?" he asked, his voice a low, serious rumble that was nothing like his television persona. "Don't you play with me, son. Is this the truth?" I could only nod, my throat suddenly too tight to speak. I saw him glance up at a darkened glass window high above the audience, where the network executives watched the show. He was weighing something, making a calculation that I couldn't begin to comprehend. The rules of the show, the integrity of the game, the legal ramifications, it was all swirling around him. He was no longer a comedian telling jokes. He was the captain of a multi-million-dollar ship that I had just tried to sink with a single piece of paper. He looked back at the note, then at me, then over my shoulder at Chad, who was now being restrained by a producer as he continued to yell about his rights as a contestant. A decision settled over Steve's face. He straightened up, his whole demeanor changing. He was in charge. He walked back to the center of the stage, leaving me standing alone. He held up his hands, and a powerful silence fell over the entire studio. The audience, the producers, my family, even the Millers, Everyone waited. "All right, everybody calm down," he said, his voice now booming with authority. He wasn't speaking to the audience, he was speaking to his crew. "Get that man back to his podium." He pointed at Chad, who reluctantly let the producer guide him back to his spot, his face a mask of thunderous rage. Steve then turned to the floor manager. "Turn the lights back on, and get the cameras rolling. We're finishing this game." The floor manager looked like he was about to argue, but a single look from Steve stopped him cold. He spoke into his headset, and a moment later, the magical, dreamlike glow of the studio lights washed over us again. The main camera's red light blinked on. We were live. The audience was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. It felt less like a game show and more like a courtroom. Steve stood at his podium, but he didn't pick up his question card. He held my note in his hand, though he kept it folded out of the camera's view. "Folks," he began, talking directly to the camera, to the millions of people who would eventually see this. "We've had a little interruption. A question has been raised about the integrity of our game tonight." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He glanced at our family, then his eyes settled on the Millers. "Now, the rules are the rules, and I'm a man who believes in rules, but sometimes you gotta look beyond the rules to find the truth." My heart was pounding a hole in my chest. What was he doing? Was he going to read the note? Was he going to disqualify us? Or them? Chad Miller stood stiffly, a smug, defiant look on his face, as if he dared Steve to continue. He clearly believed this was all a bluff, a desperate ploy by a loser that would amount to nothing. "The Peterson family has one chance to steal," Steve continued, his voice steady. "If their answer is on the board, they win. That's the game, and we're going to play the game." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. But it was short-lived. "But first," Steve said, turning his body slowly, deliberately, until he was facing Chad Miller directly. The camera followed his gaze, pushing in for a close-up on Chad's face. The charming, confident mask was still there, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. Steve Harvey, America's favorite TV host, the king of feel-good family entertainment, looked directly at Chad, a hunter staring down his prey. The studio lights glinted off the sweat that had suddenly appeared on Chad's forehead. Then Steve asked a question that had nothing to do with the game, a question that wasn't on any survey, a question that broke every rule in the book. "Chad," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "tell me about the man in the green polo shirt you met in the bathroom during our last commercial break." A thick, suffocating silence blanketed the studio. For a moment it was as if someone had hit the mute button on the universe. Chad Miller's face, which had been a canvas of smug arrogance, went completely blank. It was the face of a man who had just seen a ghost. He blinked, a slow, deliberate motion, as his brain struggled to process the words that had just been fired at him like a bullet. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then a corner of his lip twitched upwards into a pathetic attempt at a smirk. "What?" he stammered, trying to laugh it off. The sound was dry and thin, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "The man in the green polo shirt? Steve, what are you talking about?" "Did this guy," he jabbed a finger in my direction, his hand shaking slightly, "put you up to this? This is insane. He's a sore loser making up crazy stories." Steve Harvey didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, an immovable object of judgment, holding my note like it was a holy text. "I'm going to ask you again, Chad. Think real hard. Commercial break. Just outside the men's restroom by Studio B. A fella, maybe 50 years old, glasses, little bit of a bald spot, green polo shirt, ringing any bells?" Every detail was a hammer blow. I felt my own breath catch in my throat. Those were the exact words I had scribbled on that piece of paper in a blind panic. During that last break, I'd gone to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, my nerves shot. As I came out, I saw Chad huddled in a small alcove with a man I vaguely recognized from the contestant check-in area. The man was whispering urgently, and I saw him slip a folded piece of paper, identical to the ones the show's researchers used, into Chad's hand. I saw Chad nod, tuck the paper into his pocket, and then clap the man on the shoulder, the man in the green polo shirt. I'd frozen, hidden behind a large prop case, my mind racing. It was the answers. It had to be. All the bizarre high-point answers they'd been pulling out of thin air suddenly made sense. It wasn't just good guessing. It was a script. On the note, I described the man, the exchange, everything. I even wrote down what I overheard the man whisper as he left. Number 3 for the pregnancy question is a positive test. It polled surprisingly high. Chad's father stepped forward now, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage, an accusation of this magnitude on national television. We will sue you. We will sue this network. We will sue this pathetic, cheating family, he roared, pointing at us. My sister gasped, and my little brother looked like he was about to cry. Steve finally turned his attention away from Chad, giving the father a look so cold it could have frozen fire. Sir, I suggest you go back to your podium and let your son answer the question, because this whole thing is about to get a whole lot worse for you if you don't. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of an avalanche. The old man's mouth snapped shut. He looked at his son, whose composure was visibly cracking. The sweat wasn't just on his forehead now, it was dripping down his temples. I don't know who you're talking about, Chad said, his voice barely a whisper. I talk to a lot of people, fans of the show. This man wasn't a fan, Chad, Steve pressed, taking a half step forward. And the paper he gave you wasn't a fan letter, was it? Was it, maybe, a list? A list of the top survey answers for this final round. Steve's eyes flickered to the big board, where the answers remained hidden. For instance, I bet you were planning on saying a positive pregnancy test, if you got the chance, weren't you? That was it. The direct quote I'd put in the note. Chad's face went from pale to ghostly white. He looked like he'd been physically struck. He knew. Steve knew. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't a bluff. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a pure, murderous hatred, and in that moment, he knew he was caught. The granite jawline, the perfect teeth, the confident smirk. It all dissolved into the pathetic fear of a schoolboy caught cheating on a final exam. His family stared at him, their expressions shifting from righteous anger to dawning horror and confusion. Chad? His sister asked, her voice small. What is he talking about? Chad ignored her. He looked from Steve to the producers in the wings, who were speaking frantically into their headsets, to the silent, gaping audience. He was trapped. The lights, the cameras, the millions of people watching at home, the stage that was meant to be his moment of triumph, had become his cage. And like a cornered animal, his only instinct was to bolt. In a move that stunned everyone, he shoved his podium away from him. It scraped loudly against the floor as he turned and made a run for it, trying to get off the stage, to escape the lights, the accusation, the humiliation. The audience gasped collectively. A security guard started to move from the shadows. My family huddled together in disbelief. Chad Miller, captain of the perfect family, was running away. He didn't get 5 feet. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Chad. Steve's voice boomed through the studio, stopping him in his tracks. Chad froze, his back to the cameras. Because I haven't gotten to the best part of this note yet. Steve waited until Chad slowly, reluctantly turned back around to face him. The defiance was gone, replaced by pure, naked terror. See, this young man here was very thorough, Steve said, gesturing towards me without breaking eye contact with Chad. He didn't just write down what he saw. He wrote down who he saw. I know the man's name, Chad. And what's more, I know where he works. And that's the part you really don't want me to say out loud on national television. Because the man in the green polo shirt, his name is Mark, and he's one of this show's lead researchers. The confession, when it came, wasn't a torrent of words. It was a single, devastating sound. A choked sob escaped Chad Miller's lips, a sound of such complete and utter defeat that it sucked all the air out of the studio. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant athlete, the smug captain, the man who had mocked my family, simply crumpled. He covered his face with his hands, his entire body shaking. The lie was too big, the truth too public. He was broken. His family looked on, their faces a gallery of shock and betrayal. His father, who moments before had been threatening lawsuits, now looked like a man who had aged a decade in 30 seconds. His sister was openly crying, her hand over her mouth. They hadn't known. That much was clear. Chad had cheated not only the game, but his own family. Steve let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket. He wasn't gloating. He looked profoundly sad, disappointed. He walked over to Chad and placed a hand on his shoulder. Son, you need to tell me the truth. Right now. Was Mark giving you the answers? Chad couldn't speak. He just nodded, his face still buried in his hands. The audience let out a collective mournful groan. It wasn't the cheer of victory. It was the sound of a dream dying. The fun, the laughter, the fantasy of a fair game had been shattered. All right. That's all I needed to hear, Steve said, his voice softer now, but with an undercurrent of finality. He turned to the stunned Miller family. Folks, I am truly sorry about this. But you understand, I have to disqualify you from the game." No one argued. They looked like statues, frozen in their personal tragedy. Two producers came onto the stage and quietly, gently, escorted the entire Miller family off, away from the lights, their brief moment of television fame ending in the worst possible way. As Chad was led away, he looked back at me one last time. There was no hatred in his eyes now, just a hollow, empty shame. I felt a pang of something that wasn't victory. It felt more like pity. When they were gone, Steve turned to face the audience and the cameras. "Well, folks," he said, letting out a long, slow breath, "in all my years of hosting this show, I have never seen anything like what just happened here tonight. Family Feud is about family. It's about fun. It's about integrity. And when that integrity is threatened, we have to make it right." He looked over at my family. We were still huddled together, completely stunned by the whirlwind of events. "By rule, the game is forfeited, which means the Peterson family, you're going to fast money." The studio exploded. The manufactured applause from earlier was replaced by a genuine, roaring ovation. The audience was on its feet. My sister and I grabbed each other, screaming and crying at the same time. Kevin, my little brother, was jumping up and down, his face split by a grin of pure joy. We had won. In the craziest, most unbelievable way possible. We had won. It felt surreal, like a dream I was about to wake up from. Steve came over and gave each of us a hug. When he got to me, he pulled me in close. "Son, you got more guts than a butcher's shop," he whispered in my ear. "What you did took real courage. Your mom would be proud." I felt a lump form in my throat. I just nodded, unable to speak. All the anger, the tension, the fear from the last hour drained out of me, leaving me feeling shaky and overwhelmed. We played fast money in a daze. Lisa and I were chosen. I went first, sequestered backstage in a small room with a soundproof headset on, the pulsing theme music barely audible. When my turn came, I walked back out onto the stage. The energy had completely shifted. The audience was with us, cheering for every answer. Steve read the questions, and the answers just came to me. Name a reason you might be late for work. Traffic. Name something you find in a glove compartment. The car's manual. I was in a zone, channeling every single episode my mom and I had watched together. Lisa went next, and she was brilliant. She filled in the gaps, finding better answers where mine were weak. With one question left, we needed only 18 points to win the $20,000. The studio was electric. "All right, Lisa," Steve said, his voice full of excitement. "For the win, name something you do before you go to bed." Lisa, without a moment's hesitation, almost shouted, "Kiss my kids goodnight." The audience let out a collective, "Oh." Steve smiled, a huge, genuine grin. "Oh, that's a good one, a real good one," said, "Kiss my kids goodnight." "And if it's up there, you're leaving here with $20,000, survey says." The board began to reveal the number. It ticked up. 10, 20, 30. It landed on 42. Ding! We had done it. Confetti cannons exploded, showering the stage in a glittering rain. We were screaming, hugging, crying. We had won the money. We had won the game. We had honored our mom in the most dramatic way imaginable. It was the perfect ending. But as the confetti settled and the crew began to swarm the stage, the head floor manager, the same one who had been so angry with me earlier, approached Steve. He was holding a phone to his ear, and his face was ashen. He handed the phone to Steve, gesturing with a frantic urgency. Steve's celebratory smile faded as he took the phone. "Hello? This is Harvey." He listened for a moment, his expression turning grim. His eyes scanned the studio, looking past the cameras, past the cheering crowd, and landed directly on me. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. It wasn't over. He listened for another 10 seconds, said a quiet, "I understand," and handed the phone back. He walked toward me, his steps heavy. The confetti was still clinging to the shoulders of his suit. He put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "Son," he said, his voice low and serious, cutting through the celebratory noise. "We got another problem, a much bigger one. That phone call was from the head of the network's legal department. They found Mark, the researcher. He's talking. And he's not just talking about the answers to the game. He's saying that the paper he gave to Chad, it wasn't his idea." The confetti felt like ashes on my skin. The celebratory theme music warped into a menacing drone in my ears. The cheering audience, my ecstatic family, It all faded into a distant, muffled roar. All I could see was Steve Harvey's face, etched with a gravity that chilled me to the bone. "What do you mean it wasn't his idea?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. "Mark is scared, son," Steve said, steering me towards the side of the stage, away from the prying eyes and cameras. "He's singing like a canary to save his own skin. He says he didn't just decide to leak the answers on his own. He was paid, bribed, by someone who wanted to make absolutely sure the Miller family won tonight's game." My mind reeled, struggling to connect the dots. A bribe? This went beyond simple cheating. This was a conspiracy. "Who?" I asked. "Who would bribe a researcher for a game show?" Steve looked me dead in the eye, and the name he said felt like a physical blow. Chad Miller's father. It was so simple and so ugly. The man who had feigned such righteous indignation, who had threatened to sue everyone in sight, was the architect of the whole deceit. It wasn't just Chad's arrogance, it was an entire family's fraudulent ambition. "According to Mark," Steve continued, "Mr. Miller approached him weeks ago, offered him $5,000 cash, said his son had a bit of a gambling problem, was in deep with the wrong people, and that winning the show was the only way to get him out of the hole without the family finding out. A sob story to cover up a crime." A wave of nausea washed over me. The smugness, the condescending remarks, the blatant disrespect. It was all a performance, a smokescreen to hide a desperate, pathetic secret. They hadn't just come to play, they'd come to steal. "So what happens now?" I asked, my head spinning. "Now we do the right thing," Steve said, his jaw set. "The lawyers are handling the Millers. There's going to be a full-blown investigation, but that's their mess. Our mess is right here." He gestured out at the studio, at the show that had just been irrevocably tainted. "The network wants to scrap the whole episode, pretend it never happened. They want to quietly pay you your winnings and have you sign a non-disclosure agreement so thick you could use it as a doorstop." My heart sank. Scrap the episode? But... Hey, my mom. The thought of this moment, this tribute to her, being erased from existence was more painful than losing the money. This was supposed to be her victory, too. "I know," Steve said, his voice softening with empathy. "That's what I told them. I told them this isn't just some game we can edit out. This is a story. It's a story about a family's love for their mother. It's a story about a young man who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. And it's a story about the truth coming out right here, under these bright lights." He paused, a fire igniting in his eyes. "And I told them we're not cutting a damn thing." He turned and strode back to the center of the stage, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, people, listen up. We're not done here." The crew, who had been starting to pack up, froze. My family looked over, confused. Steve took his place back at his podium, a commander reclaiming his post. He looked at the head camera. "Is that thing still rolling?" he yelled. A cameraman gave a thumbs up. "Good, don't stop." He then looked directly at me, at my family. "Petersons, get back to your podium. This show is going to have a proper ending." We stumbled back into our positions, dazed. The confetti was still all over the floor. The board still flashed our winning score. It felt like stepping back into a dream. "Folks at home," Steve said, his voice resonating with a power and sincerity I had never heard from him before. He was no longer a host, he was a storyteller, our storyteller. "You just saw something you probably thought you'd never see. You saw the ugly side of competition. But what you also saw was the beautiful side of family. You saw the Peterson family, who came here not just to win money, but to honor the memory of their mother, who loved this show." He looked at us, his eyes shining. "She taught them well. She taught them about honesty, about courage, and about fighting for what you believe in." He then held up my crumpled note. "I'm not supposed to do this. The lawyers are probably having a heart attack right now, but I don't care." He unfolded the note. "I want to read you part of what it said." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Harvey," he began, reading my shaky handwriting. "My name is David Peterson. My family and I are here for my mom. She passed away 6 months ago. Her last wish was to see us all laughing on this stage. The family we are playing against is cheating. I saw them get the answers during the commercial break. I know this is against the rules, but my mom also taught me that some rules are meant to be broken when it comes to defending your family's honor. Please, just help me make this right for her." Tears were streaming down my face. My sister was sobbing into my shoulder. The audience was completely silent, hanging on his every word. Steve folded the note carefully and put it in his own jacket pocket. "David Peterson," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at me. "You did more than make it right. You reminded all of us what this show is really about. It ain't just about the money. It's about the feud. And the feud is about the love you have for your family. A love so strong you'll do anything to protect it. He stepped away from his podium and walked over to us. He didn't offer a handshake. He pulled all four of us into a massive group hug. The audience rose to their feet, and this time the applause was thunderous. It was genuine and heartfelt, and it washed over us like a healing wave. He released us and looked into the camera one last time. This episode will air, every second of it, because people need to see that in the end, truth and love will always, always get the #1 answer. And as the credits rolled and the theme music swelled, I looked at the smiling faces of my siblings, at the genuine warmth in Steve Harvey's eyes, at the cheering crowd, and I knew that this moment would never be erased. We hadn't just won a game show. We had given our mom the one thing she always wanted. A story for the ages, a final, beautiful testament to the strength of her family, broadcast for the whole world to see. And it was perfect.